In order to create the gaps between the puzzle pieces, we can use a feature in Cinema 4D called Create Outline. If you right-click in the viewport, you can select Create Outline from the context menu. And all we need to do is left-click in the viewport and drag. Now you can see that we're having a bit of a problem because we're not getting an even width for this outline along the length of the spline. And the reason for that is because Create Outline doesn't have enough information to create that even width for us. And that means we have to add an additional point. So let's undo this. I'm going to switch to my Move tool and I'm going to create one more point somewhere close to this curve here. So hold down Control and left click anywhere here to create this extra point. And now if we use Create Outline, we should get something a lot more even. So if I extrude this and render it, you can see everything's looking fine now. Of course, I don't want the outline to be that wide. So let's undo this, and I'm going to enter a distance here for the outline in the Attributes Manager. We could try the default of 5 centimeters, but this seems a little bit wide. So what I'm going to do is maybe use only 4 centimeters. And once you've hit apply, you can't really change the distance and get an update in the viewport. So if you don't like the distance, you have to go back a step, enter a different number. Let's try 4 and hit apply. So 4 is actually looking good. Before we can mirror this spline over to the top, there's a couple more things that we need to do. First of all, we need to make sure that our spline is open up here, because this is our mirror plane. And that should be easy enough. We just need to select the spline and uncheck Close Spline. The other thing we have to bear in mind is that both of these points here need to be at 0 on the y-axis, because this is our mirror plane, and in order to be able to mirror this spline properly, these points have to be at 0. So let's go ahead and check that. This point here, you can see it's at 0 on the y-axis. However, this one isn't. And there's a couple of ways we can fix that. Because the distance by which it is offset from 0 on the y-axis is so small, we could just simply zero this out, hit apply, and it's not going to change the shape of our spline here. The other way to do that, or one of the other ways we could do that, is we could use the knife tool. And I'm going to use the line cut tool here, and I have single line switched on. And we could snap the knife tool to this point and make a straight cut over here. Now, because snapping for the knife tool is not very accurate, I'm going to additionally switch on this snapping here. And this sometimes seems to help. So let's enable snapping, make sure that vertex snap is switched on, and now we can snap the knife tool to this point, hold down Shift, and create a straight cut over here. I'm going to switch to the Move tool and delete the top point here, and let's select this one, and you can see it's almost at 0 now. So I'm going to just change the number to 0 here, hit enter, and now the point is exactly where it should be. In order to mirror this spline over to the top, we could use the symmetry object, of course. So we'll have to change the mirror plane to XZ, and that's working fine. The problem is that we're going to use Spline Mask later to subtract this gap from the ring, and using symmetry inside a Spline Mask object won't work. And that means we have to make the symmetry object editable. The problem is, if we do that, we're also going to convert our spline. So let's make this editable, and if I select the spline, you can see we've created a ton of new points here. And what you see is the intermediate points that Cinema 4D creates depending on the angle that we have set for the spline resolution. So if I go back a few steps and select the spline, you can see the angle is set to maximum detail. If I bring that up to the default of 5% again and make the symmetry object editable, we're still getting a lot of points Not as many as before, but still way too many. So using symmetry is not really an option here. The solution is pretty simple. All we have to do really is make a copy of this spline and then go to model mode and use rotate to rotate the copy minus 180 degrees. And now we can select both of these splines and use connect objects and delete to combine them into a single spline. Let's go back to point mode. What we have to do now is we have to weld some points together, because right now this spline seems like a single object, but the segments are still separate. So if I use my rectangle selection tool, for example, and I have only select visible elements unchecked here, and if I select these 2 points, you can see in the heads-up display we actually have 4 points here. So in order to fix this problem, we only have to select 2 of these points, and we can use the Weld tool and just left click anywhere in the viewport to weld these points together. And you can see that we now only have 1 point here. Over here the second point has been removed automatically, and now we have this opening here. So let's select our spline and use close spline, and we have our completed gap. In the next video we're going to use spline mask to subtract the gap from the ring and create our basic puzzle pieces.